So hello and welcome everyone. Hope you're having a great Saturday. Spent some time getting my son's condo handled with some electrical challenges, and that is all set. And now we are ready to start in on painting and creativity. My cat is already coming over to say hello, so we'll let them stick their little furry face in here while everything is nice and clean. And that way they then leave us alone while we are trying to actually paint. This is the cat water test to make sure that the water is nice and clean and ready. So what I'll be doing today is a pen and ink watercolor painting. And the theme I posted earlier in the BVAA thread is a UFO. Back in October, there was the Inktober challenge where every day they had a theme word and everyone made a ink drawing out of that theme word. And I was doing ink drawings, which I then turned into watercolor paintings. So day 10 was the theme of hope. And my hope is that space aliens are going to come and give us some sort of technology to clean up our planet, because I don't know that we're ever going to get our act together and fix it before we make changes that are pretty unfixable here. So I made a UFO, and then I auctioned off all my paintings for charity, and my friend Linda Nelson bought the UFO, and I put it into the Postal Service, and that was in the middle of December, and she has still not gotten it, and we're in the middle of January. So I'm going to assume that the Postal Service lost it, and I'm going to make her a new one. So, you can paint what I'm painting, or you can paint whatever you want. I suppose I will take this off. So this is watercolor paper that came on a spiral ring originally. And then we're going to start with a pencil sketch. I tend to always start with a pencil sketch for my art, because that way if I make mistakes I can erase it, and I highly recommend having an external eraser, not the actual pencil end eraser, because these things for some reason are notoriously bad. But this way we can refine the image and make it exactly the way we want it. And then when we are set with it, we can put the pen over it. Alright, so let me just check that that all looks good. So brush, just so people get all their supplies set up. I tend to use a reasonably medium-sized round brush, but you can use, although I'm looking at this, it looks like the cats have been nibbling on this. That's alright. Just any sort of brush will do fine when we get to the watercolor stage. I've got water, I've got paints, somewhere to mix the paints. And I've got a waterproof pen. You want to use a waterproof pen. I happen to use a Jelly Roll 06 Sakura pen, but you don't need to use this particular one. Just make sure it's waterproof, because when you do watercolors over it and the watercolors are wet, you don't want that to be smearing the pen. Alright, so let me just call up my own UFO design. When you're doing art for someone, it gets to be the question of, do you want to try to make it an exact duplicate of the previous art? And then, which leads into the question, can you ever make an exact duplicate? There's been times when someone has made a piece of art and I said, I really like that, and they say, oh, I'll make one for you, and then the new one that they make looks nothing at all like the one that I really liked. So it's just a hard challenge to make a piece of art that looks exact or nearly or even close to a previous set of art. So I'm going to make a UFO. It'll be something like the UFO, but we will find out. Alright. So I'm looking at my other UFO for guidance. So I tend to make UFOs. I'm just going to turn this a little to make this easier on my drawing angle for now. I'm going to have a dome top. Nope, see, I already on a higher dome top. Higher dome top. Yeah, like that. shoulders of the UFO. For some reason, when I try to think about things that are symmetrical, I have challenges right now making them come out symmetrical. That doesn't quite look the same. Alright, that's why we have an eraser. Oh, it's still more shouldery. You know, if I drew this on tracing paper and then did half of it and then just flipped it and did the other half, that would make it come out more even. Alright, that looks reasonably even. Alright. Okay. Clearly, you do not need to make your UFO the way that I make my UFO. Every UFO is different, and that is fine. Oh, that's not quite right. So I'll give you some insights into my choice for the UFO. The UFO, the first one that I did, I'm going to do the same thing here, had a white crisscross pattern, and I did that for Justice Ginsburg, was the type of collar that she tended to wear. And I just really like the color blue. Alright, so what shall we put? So the other UFO was sort of heading that way. I do in general like things to head from left to right. So I think I will keep heading it, let it go that way. But I think in this case I'll make the antenna over here. And I will put a radar dish up here in the front. Alright. Let's just see. There's a little bumper sticker down here. Circles. I'll put the observation windows up here this time. That was a little too close to the sidewall. Little circles along here. I'm a fan of circles, if you haven't guessed. Maybe another stripe there. Another stripe there. Alright, so that then makes it clearer that this is a little off. No, that's still. Well, it's not quite right about that. I think that needs to come down a little. So that's why you have erasers. Pull that down more. Pull that across more. Oh, it's getting better. Alrighty. So I think we have enough now to do the ink sketch part. Alright, so again for the ink, I am using a waterproof pen. This is a Sakura Jelly Roll 06, but it doesn't matter that you use that, it just matters that you use something that's waterproof so that we get to the wet stage of this. The pen is not getting all washed away by the water. And I'm not exactly following the pencil at this point. Because now I can make the lines smoother. And think both about your natural movement of your hand to keep the line smooth, and also think about where your hand's going to be brushing this ink, which while it dries quickly, it still goes on wet, so you don't want to be touching it right when you put it down because you could smear it. And while it's easy to erase a pencil mark, it is less easy to erase a pen mark. I've been told you can minimize pen with Windex on a Q-tip, but I would still rather not test that theory. Alright. It's also worth noting that I like the sketch feel of pen and ink, so my aim here is not to make exact lines. I like them feeling a little loose and casual, because to me that helps show that these were made by a person. Hello, kitten. Thank you so much for coming and visiting us. I know all sorts of interesting things are going on over here. UFOs, space aliens. Good kitten. We have two black cats that are siblings. Oh, let me do these. My son has 3 cats that are all unrelated to each other. So now we smell like the 3 cats because we just got back from their condo. And my cats are all suspicious why I smell like other people's cats. I'm gonna changing the windows a little as I work on them. Make them more consistent with their surroundings. I'm going to make this one more like that. So on one hand I could have gone back and changed the pencil. On the other hand, I'm changing the pen on the fly, and that is okay too. And then I'll be able to just erase out some of that extra pencil mark where I don't want it. Okay, the antenna. The radar dish. And now the little circles. So this is where I need to be a little careful since I have all this reasonably wet ink here. I don't want to be smearing. So I'll try to keep my hands off of the wet ink. And then we'll do circles. Alright, so we've got the pen and ink down for the design, and we'll just give that a moment or two to dry so that as I do the erasing and then the painting part, I do not smear that ink. Ask with any questions. Hope you guys are all having fun. Alrighty. So that should be pretty dry by now. It dries quickly, so it's not that you have to wait a long time, but you want to wait at least a minute or two, lest you end up having smeared ink in your watercolor painting. And maybe you like the idea of smeared ink. Maybe that adds a certain something to your art style. But I would rather not have smeared ink on mine. So I'm just erasing some of those old pencil lines that I didn't end up using. For the ones that are under the ink, I don't worry about those. Those will be fine. Let's get rid of those there. Alright, so that is all dry. Ink is dry. We are ready for the watercolor stage. Let's get the watercolor image up. Alright, so I don't want to duplicate the old one because I don't want poor Linda to end up with two of the exact same watercolor when or if the other one comes out of the mail system. But on the other hand, I want them to go reasonably together, so if she does like both of them and wants to display both of them, they aren't completely clashing with each other, that they're sort of the same set. So we'll start with the blues of the dome. I really like this particular blue over here, which I'll just take a look. Is the Marie's cerulean blue. The one next to it is the Phoenix cerulean blue. I'm trying to sear my scissors. I've got a color chart over here. So even though those look fairly different, those are both called cerulean by their manufacturers, so it's part of why I like having paints from different brands out here. So we're going to start with the little tail one. I just find that such a pretty color. And to give things three-dimensionality, think about where the light is coming from and where it would cast shadow. So I tend to have the light coming from the top left in most of my pictures, which means that that side. I mean, this whole thing is probably under shadow anyway because it's in the bottom, but still I like to have a little bit darker on the left, a little bit lighter on the right. The top center, I didn't draw him in, and maybe I will do that. I have a giant alien steering it. Let's see, what do we want to do? Last time I just had a guy with antennas and big eyes. So, we'll make head, 2 big eyes. We'll give him curly antennas this time. A smile. With 3 fingers. I'm going to do something to their chest. You know, on one hand I was thinking circles, but unfortunately with human beings we tend to think of circles as breasts, and that's not quite the look I was going for. And squares would look like windows in their body. So, I don't know, I'll put triangles. How's that? There we go. I like that. Alright, so the blue, so I'm going to go around the alien, because my aliens tend to be green. You know, actually, after saying that, I have this big brush. I'm going to switch to a littler brush. Alright, that brush is a little crunchy. How about you? Alright. Hello, kitten. Kitten? Please don't nuzzle the phone. The whole reason I put the phone up on that clampy thing is so that you can no longer knock the tripod over. Remember how you used to knock the tripod over? I know. You just want to help. Kitten, I'm having trouble seeing around your tail. Yes, you are so helpful. So helpful. Are you just going to stop right there and knock everything? Good kitten. Yes, I now have the cell phone on a clamp attached to the shelf next to me, because I used to do this with the phone on a tripod and the cat would come and knock the tripod over. Sweetie, this is wet. I do not want your little paws in the wet paint. Yes, I know. You want to help. You are such a help. You are so helpful. To nuzzle the brush end while I am trying to paint a picture. Right, so I got a little dollop of the blue over here on the mixing area, and I'm just using that since I've got it rather than going back to the actual color, and that makes it lighter because, as I said, I like to put things lighter on the right where the light source is coming from and darker over on the left, which is where the shadows is. So I'll dip into the actual color to make it a little more saturated, because the way watercolors work, the light comes from the room light going through the paint, hitting the white paper, and bouncing back out at your eyeball. So the more saturated you make it, the more pigment that's there blocking the light from getting through to the watercolor paper, and so the darker it ends up looking. Where over here I only put a very light layer on. So now if I put more over here, that ends up being darker. And the areas which is got less pigment ends up looking lighter. It's also worth mentioning that watercolors dry lighter than the way they look when they're wet. So however dark this looks now while it's wet, while it dries it's going to end up being lighter. And then we put on a second layer and a third layer and so on. Watercolors are very much about building layers of color. Alright, so we're also going to have windows down here with little peoples in them. So I'm going to draw in some little people now so that they have a chance to dry, and I'll work on some other things, and then once they're dry I will put in the paint in the windows area. So make little people having a party over here, dancing. Over here we'll have a little table and people sitting at the table. Over here we could have a person talking. So I think of these whole little scenarios. And a bunch of people sitting and listening to them. Over here we could just have a person sitting, staring out and watching the world go by. Oh, maybe over here we'll have a person with a cat. Space alien cat. And another person. Alright, so just the random daily life of these little space aliens. Fill in the bumper sticker. Alright, let those things dry. Right, so on one hand, I said I want the colors to be different, but on the other hand, I just really like this cerulean blue. So I'm going to once again make my little dots in cerulean blue because it's just the way I like to do it. So I'm putting the starting darker dot on the left side of each of them. So most of the heavy pigment's off my brush now. Go to the water, fill in the rest. Sometimes you think people won't really notice little differences, but I think they do. They pick up on those subtle shades of light and dark, and it just makes the scene seem more complete to them. So it's worth putting in those kinds of little details. You should of course use colors that you really like. I'm making this out of colors that make me really happy. I love these blues. And also there's a sense of certain colors tend to go well together. They strike most people's eyes as being a visually appealing combination. And there's all sorts of programs on the computer or on your phone that if you put in one color, like this cerulean blue, it'll tell you what their complements are, what other colors go well with them. So you don't even have to know or memorize them, although you sort of get used to over time what things work well together. Or you can just check an app and say, okay, I like working with cerulean blue. What are some other colors that will go well with it when I'm making my paintings? Alright. Well, see, I was going to make the radar just bright yellow. I will make it yellow again. That's alright. I'm trying not to make this as an exact duplicate of the other one. Not like it's even remotely going to be an exact duplicate, but keep some aspects of it the same. Right, so the concern about working on things that are wet next to things that are still wet is if you have two wet areas next to each other and the paint touches, the capillary action of the water will suck the paint across because both of the areas are wet, and you'll end up with a bit of mud. So it's better to make sure that an area really is dry before painting near it. So this is a fern green from Reeves. I like these bright kinds of colors. Fern green and cerulean blue. Keep their little eyes white. So in general, in watercolor, you don't paint things white. You let the white be the white of the paper, because that will always be the whitest aspect of your painting. In this one, we're going to add stars at the end, and we're going to do that at the very end by putting an actual bleed-proof white on the very top. This happens to be Dr. P.H. Martin's. Normally in watercolors, all the layers are seen through, so if you put another layer on top, like if I put a red on top of this blue, you'd see through both of them and it would end up looking purple. So the bleed proof will actually sit on top of the other color and retain its color. You won't see through it. But then that also means you're not seeing through the white of the paper anymore, so it loses that kind of magical stained glass glow that I love so much. Alright, so now I'm putting in the blue of the windows. Now that that ink has dried, so it won't smear. Went on heavier with the first window because I had the most pigment on the brush. So what I'm doing is now coming back, and it'll suck up some of the pigment. Once the brush starts to get drier, it acts as a sponge as it's going over. So if I go back over here, now I'm drawing up the pigment from that area to try to make that a little lighter, and now to make this a little darker. So the reason I'm going back and forth between these is to manage the color a little to make it more even. So I'm pulling up a little blue from here. Now I'm putting down a little blue here, and you can see that's lighter because I'm getting to the tail end of the pigment. But in terms of my left to right, I actually want this one over here to be the lightest because that's closest to my imaginary light source. And I want the left-hand sides to be a little darker, so I'm dragging the paint from the right side to the left side, so it gets a little lighter on the right side, a little darker on the left side. And I could go back again with make multiple layers, but that's a good starting point at least. And while I've got a little pigment on here, I'll dab a little more blue into the left side dots, which by my theory should be a little darker. And then they get a little lighter as they head over to the right. Alright, so now we get to the point where I used to have this top area, which was smaller in the other one. I had the darker blue and then the yellow. I do like that to be a darker color because, again, with the whole Justice Ginsburg theory, I like it being dark with a crisscross of white on top of it. And again, to put white on the very top, we have to use the bleed-proof white, which is the one that'll sit on the top. But we just did blue in the previous one. So I am going to do purple, I think. And we have a nice violet. I think the Royal Langdon violet, which is this one right here. And I can just paint this solid because I'm going to be putting the white on top. Now, of course, the risk here is it could be that Linda, who bought the previous one, really liked the yellow there, or the blue there for this part. And she will be sad when this turns purple. But hopefully that other one that I actually painted for her in the first place gets found by the Postal Service, and she'll have two, so this is just a backup one for her. And if she comes back and says that she really liked the other one having blue, then I'll just paint another painting. That is all right. It's funny, some artists don't like painting the same painting over and over again. They paint it once and they're done with it and they want to move on to something else. I think if I was trying to exactly duplicate, which would be nearly impossible anyway, then I might feel that way. But since I am doing different versions of these things, I don't mind it at all. I have fun. I suppose if I painted it like 40 or 50 times that I could start to get tired of it. But then you have to wonder, how about rock singers that come out with their one-hit wonder, and then day after day, year after year, they have to keep playing that exact same song, and maybe that song was about an ex or something, and it was cathartic to sing about it for the first couple hundred times, and then it just gets wearying to keep being reminded about all that pain and anguish you went through and you want to move on with your life. So I suppose there's always challenges for anyone. Alright, I'm going to turn this around. Try to think about the natural movement of your hand when you're doing some of these kinds of paintings, because it might be easier if it's upside down to paint against a line here like this than if you tried to do it from the opposite direction. Whatever is easiest for you. The other thing with watercolors is that you do have this layer notion, but also once something dries, then there are edges to the thing that you painted. So if I see how there's like a lighter part and a darker part, if I let it dry like that, then that would be a visible line across an area that I would rather have reasonably seamless. So you want to watch for that while you're painting it and fix it while it's wet. Because while you can re-wet it, it works best if you take care of those kinds of issues in the initial pass when things are still drying. On one hand, it's cool if I don't have to turn it, because then if I do a time-lapse version, the time-lapse version goes smoothly with everything, you know, just in one angle and the picture develops, and that's pretty. But on the other hand, if it's just not very convenient to paint something from a certain angle, it doesn't make sense to not paint it as well, just for the time-lapse purpose. Alright, so again, this area here on the right, I want to be a little lighter. Area on the left, I want to be a little bit darker. And I want to try to even out some of these color areas so that it feels reasonably smooth. And again, with the knowledge that this is going to lighten as it dries. Alright, so we got purple. Got purple. Where do I want to put the other colors? Alright, we have this green, space alien green. Another stripe of green down the middle. This is of course not space alien green. This is fern green. I suppose I like ferns a lot, so that could be why I like fern green a lot. Alright, I think I'll put the yellow around the blue. But see, I don't want to go too next to that green that I just put in. Alright, so not work on the yellow part yet. Let's go with this mauve. I'll put the mauve around the windows. Yeah, you have to be careful when an area is wet. And even these windows are probably still barely dry. But since I want to go reasonably quick with this video, I want to take a lot of time to let them dry. But what you would do normally is either go get a cup of tea or something so it can dry, or often what I do is have 2 or 3 paintings at the same time, and while one of them is drying, I'm working on another one, and then when that one gets dry, I can go back to the first one. So you definitely want to think about drying time. But on the other hand, when you talk to people who paint with oil paints, they often have to wait a week or more to dry it. I was working with Bonnie Federico, who did a really pretty painting of the Grafton gazebo. I definitely recommend taking a look at that when you get a chance. Mauve. Alright, so since I just tapped my brush down into the color, I'm going to put it down first over here so I get the darker color off my brush, and then I'll come back over here once I to a more lighter shade, once I've got some of the pigment off of the brush, to come over here. But Bonnie was doing the Grafton gazebo, which is very pretty. Definitely take a look for that on YouTube. And she had to wait a week in between our painting sessions so that the first layer dried enough that she could work on the second layer. So we're pretty fortunate with watercolor that you can just go get a cup of tea or something and have it dry enough to be working on the next stage of your process. On one hand, you need to wait those few minutes, but on the other hand, it's just a few minutes instead of a number of days. Alright. Alright, so if I do yellow for the 2 sides on either side of the green, what color should I put up in there? We'll have a lot of yellow. Since we haven't used a dark blue, I could use a dark blue up there. No, the blue that I really like, here I'll show you. Blue I really like is completely dried out. So I've got it sitting in this shot glass, it happens to be a Star Trek shot glass, and trying to eke out the paint a little at a time by sitting it in water and then having the water dehydrate so that I can get access to the paint once the water all dehydrates out. But clearly that's a long and slow process, so a friend of mine said, why don't you just cut open the tube with the razor blade? And clearly that's the wiser way to go, so I will be doing that later. But for now, I at least have access to this blue, which I think is a really pretty blue. Which is why I'm going through all this hassle to get at it, even though it dried out. Again, just being careful to not get too close to the purple. It is mostly dry. Is it really all the way dry? You might think something is reasonably dry, and then you go and poke near it, and suddenly you have colors running into areas. Like, for example, this purple is barely dry, so if I get too close to the purple, I can have this blue running down into the purple area. Now, fortunately, it is quite dry in our house, even though we have humidifiers running, so that means that things are drying fairly quickly. If I was doing this in the summertime with a very humid house, then it could take these longer to dry. So even things like your room humidity have an impact. Alright, that'll do for now. Alright, I think we can go back to the water now. To the yellow. Thinking water thoughts. We can go back to the yellow now. This is where having reasonably good eyesight helps. Trying to go around all these little dots. And of course I do it to myself because I paint these designs that have all these little dots. But, you know, people paint far more detailed designs than I do, so it's completely up to you if you want to go with a large, fuzzy kind of image where you don't worry about detail, or whether you go with an image that has small little details that you have to paint around. So if you were to make a mistake, the technique would be to completely wash off your brush so your brush was clean. Get it damp, so stick it in water and then dry it off a little. And now your brush acts like a sponge. And then if you sort of gently scrape at the color area, you should be able to get most of the color back up off of the paper. And it depends in part on, here again, so I'm going on the left because I just picked up the yellow and it's very bright. And I want it to be darker over here on the left, more pigmenty, and I want it to be lighter on the right, so I, in essence, take off a little of the yellow on the paper on the left before I move forward on the right to put down what's left on there. So you can scrub off color in most cases. Sometimes some colors are stainy, so even if you try to scrub it back off again, there'll still be the sense that the color, you know, if you put on a bright red or something, you could scrub that for a while and still the paper would look red there even as you try to lift it off. And also it depends on the type of paper. If you're using a really inexpensive paper that's just meant for practicing on, then it might not take well to that kind of scrubbing, and it might start to damage the paper to scrub it. But it's worth experimenting and see how your paper behaves. And that's one of those reasons to think about getting a more expensive paper as you get further into your painting, because it lets you do more things with it. And that's part of why it costs more, is that it's got those extra capabilities as compared to a student practice paper. So if you've seen the videos of my other UFO, you'll see that in some ways this is similar to it, but in other ways it's fairly different, because even though I'm using the same colors, I'm using them in a different way. Oh, see that blue is still a little wet. Right, so what I'm doing is I'm cleaning off my brush in water. I'm drying it off so it's damp but dry, and now I'm scraping a little bit at this blue, and it's picking that blue back up where it swept out into what should be yellow. So it's sort of acting like a sponge. Alright, so I'll leave that area alone until that dries. So I don't do that again. I'm going to make the bumper sticker the mauve. And we'll make the little ring thing yellow, I think. Alright, so I think those are all the key areas of the flying saucer. Let me try to get this blue a little darker blue. So that paint that I'm trying to get out of the dried out tube belongs in here, so there's still some little bits of blue in there that I can use. Give that a little more darkness. What are we doing on time? I'm getting close to my limit on time because Laura Senadella comes on at 1, and I want to be able to watch her. But here, we will get through the sky part quickly. Alright, so I think you get the sense of what to do with the UFO. Let me just fix these little edge bits. Alright. Well, and actually looking at this green stripe, you can sit here and poke at things forever, but the green stripe is lighter over here, and I want things darker on the left, so that stands out now as being not in tune with everything else. So I'm going to put in some more of the same green. It's not that I'm changing greens, but since I'm putting on another layer of the green, it ends up seeming darker because it's covering up the ability of the light to reach the paper over there. Alright. And now I'll just use a wet brush to drag it a little more to the right to soften that edge. Alright. Right, we'll call that nicely done. Alright, so for the sky, I don't need the little brush, so I'm going to clean the little brush. And always store your brushes upright so that the tips are not squishing and damaged. Alright, so back to this. Alright, so the trick with the sky is it's going to take a couple of swaths of black to get it to darken enough. And also, we're going to be going off the edges, so I'm going to get a piece of cardboard to stick under here so that I do not get my desk all black. Alright, so nice big thing. Alright, we have to be sort of careful because we don't want black seeping into an actual UFO. So at least for this first pass or two, I'm going to leave a white area around the UFO because it's going to take multiple passes, like I said, to make this black enough anyway to really look like a night sky. So we'll show you how this works. And then the stars come on at the very, very end. And ideally you want to put the stars on when the black is dry. So we may not do the stars in this video, or maybe I will record it separately and tag it on for you for the YouTube video. Alright, so I'm leaving a gap of white around the UFO just in case any of that paint is still wet, that I don't cause the black that I'm about to put down to get sucked into wet areas of the UFO itself. Right, so that is wet, so we're going to go with black, which is right there. And you can see in the first pass, it looks like a pale black. Even though I'm taking the straight pigment right out of the little thing. But that's okay, because we're going to do this in layers. And I like it that it has this kind of cloudy texture to it because it adds some sort of dimension to this sky around the UFO. And also, once we put all the speckles of stars, you won't really notice the background about its details. The stars are what's going to be what stand out to you, and the background will just be something that's there that the stars are sitting on top of. Alright, so we'll call that layer 1 of the black sky. Now I also like when a sky has bursts of this bright blue in it. So we'll just get a little bit of this blue and just put some little sections in it. This gives it more of a night sky feel to me. Alright, so we got the blue. Alright, now we're going back to the black. Back in black. Alright, I'm going to turn this. I'm going to try to go more left to right. And see how that's getting darker now? The first layer is starting to dry a little. The second layer is going on top of it. It occurs to me that I had a little yellow dangly thing on this before, and I actually like that. So I need to put that in. Now I'll have to give that a chance to dry. You'll also notice that the paper is starting to buckle a bit. This is a normal thing that watercolor paper does. What people do if they care about that is they tape the paper down to like a piece of cardboard, and then they pre-wet the entire piece of paper so it goes through this buckling stage in a controlled manner, and then they let it dry and then they paint on it, or sometimes they, while it's still wet, they start to paint on it. So these are all things that you can do, but since I use this pad as a sketch pad and I'm often just quickly sketching things on it, I in general don't go through those stages. I just let the paper do what it wants to, and I don't worry too much. The reason that you would care about buckling is that the paper runs downhill over this curve, and that could cause you problems if you cared about how the water is running at the moment. But since I'm just painting a black sky, it doesn't concern me too much how the image is bending. Right, so now I can start to get a little closer to the UFO and just really hope that that is dry. Maybe get around this little dangly thing that I added on. Hope that that ink is dry. There we go. White draws the eye, so you want to avoid having little white spots in general that will draw the eye to places that you don't really want the eye drawn to. Like, I want the eye drawn to the eyes of the space alien, so I left that white, but I don't want the eyes drawn to a little nook of the UFO down here. Kitty, I don't want you to have black all over your feet. I know, you want to help. You are such a help. Yes, step all over the keyboard, send a message to people. This is your way. Right, so now I'm going to go up around the top of the dome. Right, side of the dome. I have to be careful about where I put my fingers down now. I don't really have anywhere safe on the paper anymore that I can rest my finger. Down here. See how much that little block of white stands out now? White just really catches the human eye and draws it in, so I'm going to get rid of all those little spare spots. Alright, and then down around this edge. And you can see that this again is drying lighter than when I put it on, so this is going to need another coat or two of black. I'm going to use black as I want it for the sky. Alright, so I think I got everything with a layer of black. And that would be a matter of going back to the black, adding on another layer of black, aiming to get it nice and rich and dark so that when we put those white stars on, they really stand out against the blackness of it. And this is exactly why I put the cardboard down. Now if I got the black on the UFO, that would be a lot harder to get up. I might attempt it, but that gets to the point where you say, alright, you just have to start over again. This was good practice, but fortunately so far I'm doing alright. Oh, size 102, alright, so I need to finish up so I can go over it and watch Laura. Alright, so look for Laura O. Sanadella. She will be doing a beautiful oil painting. I will share the links on the BVAA page. And then I will record the rest of this, and when I make the finished YouTube video, I will include the speckling stage for adding the stars. But really what I'm going to do is I'm going to do another layer or two of black on this so it gets nice and dark, and then I'm going to stick a stiff brush into this, you know, think like a toothbrush, and then I'm just going to go flick, 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 and it's going to spatter little white stars all over that to make the star part. But I want to do that part when this is dry. Alright, so thank you so much for joining me, and I'm going to go share out Laura's things, so come join me with Laura. Alright, so at this stage I've got the black, a reasonable shade of black that I wanted, and now I'm ready to put on the stars. So what I did is I chose a brush that's fairly stiff, and you can use a toothbrush or something if you want to use that instead. But the idea is that you're going to be flicking the paint randomly onto this surface. And normally watercolors are see-through, and in this case we want the white to stay on top and not be see-through because you want the white speckles to be on the surface of everything. So that's where you use a bleed-proof white. This is Dr. P.H. Martin's. There's a bunch of different people who make bleed-proof whites. But the idea is if you use a regular white, it might not be bright enough to stand out against the black. So we're going to want something fairly bright. And you want to put something down on the surface because you're going to get little white speckles all over everything while you're doing this. So you want to try to minimize the amount of white. Although, I mean, this stuff washes off very easily. So we're not talking about something too staining or anything. But still, better to get it on cardboard than to get it on something else. I will also comment that once we put white on here, there's no real way to get the white back off. So this is going to be random. We got both cats interested in this process. Both cats want to be involved. No, you don't want to drink the watercolor water right now. No, you're just going to go walking all over everything. Yes, you're a very good kitty. Alright. So we put the brush into the white. So again, I get a little wet, so it's a little more speckled. So depending on how gooey or thick the paint is, it's going to make big or little blobs, depending on how aggressively you do it. And once you do this, you can't get it off, so you're just sort of taking a chance here that you're not going to completely ruin the painting with over speckling. So it's good to practice a bit with your speckling technique on something you don't care about it until you're sure that you've got the speckling that you want. But I'm just going to go for it. Alright, so I'm just going to bring my finger back and flick it just like you would flick your finger across a toothbrush or something. Alright, see how that makes little spots? And my aim here is to have some big splocks and some little splocks. Make some sort of constellation-y things. Alright, and then you can go a little overboard, as you can imagine. Say, oh, what if I put some more there? But at some point you have to stop and say, that's enough. Alright, so that's how you do the splotching to get the star effect on there. And now the painting is complete. So let me know if you have any questions about how to make a night sky kind of a painting. I am happy to answer questions or to give feedback on the kinds of thing that I'm doing. And let me know what else you'd like to see me work on, because I am happy to take ideas and suggestions for the things I work on. Thank you very much.